Hey, how's it going, everybody? I wanted to do another video as an explainer video. Um, I just got finished reading some comments on the on when I did a video a few years ago on the antelope, um, and rather they basically was asking me about my opinions on another type of interface. Now, I can't give my opinion on another interface I've never owned or tried or used. People will do that sometimes. Like I've had people ask me about, like when I was talking about my Allen and Heath, they'll ask me, "What do you think about the Mackie whatever or the Tascam?" Or some people, well, what do you think about an API? I've never owned those. I can't give an opinion on something I've never owned. So, out of a courtesy, I kind of wish people wouldn't do that. Unless you see me talk about if I've owned a piece of gear, then I'll give you an opinion on it. But if I've never owned it, I'm not going to give you an opinion on it. That's why I don't do opinions on gear a whole lot. I don't give my opinion on a whole lot of gear, especially I can't give my opinion on a gear that I never owned. That's kind of like um, me telling you my opinions on the Porsche 911 Turbo. I've never owned one. Now, can I give you opinions on a C5 Corvette? Yeah, I own one. So I give you opinions on it, and trust me, as much as I love that car has flaws. But I love the car because I love, Corvettes are beast of cars, and that's in my opinion. They're no joke. As far as they're brutal, but they have issues, especially the C5s. They got issues. So it brings me to what I want to talk about. Not too long, or hope I'm not going to talk too long. What I've got, just a couple of interfaces. Now this one interface right here. This is a Behringer FCA. It's an FCA, and it's basically, I forget the model number. Oh, the FCA 1616. It was designed to have 16 inputs and 16 outputs. So basically, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the back, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to, and then I was supposed to have 16 outputs. And you can also hook up at, another 8 through 80 at light pipe and an additional unit. All right. What I also have another unit over here. This is a Motu. This is an older one. This is an old one. It's a 24 AO. Basically 24 inputs, 24 outputs. Runs by FireWire connection, or you can use a PCI card in your for your PC or FireWire in your Mac or whatever. I also have a few other interfaces. My Antelope over there. I got another. My M Audio still sitting in the rack over here. I got under here. There's a couple of Motu 896s, HDs. Excuse me. I got some interfaces downstairs. I've had other interfaces. I've had some Personas interfaces. I've had some Focusrite interfaces. Now, now, people probably notice in the interface game for recording audio. Let me explain. First, let's talk about. Let's first, before I talk about these two ones I just showed you, and any interface, you'll probably notice out there's a lot of reviews, and most of the reviews, if you go on YouTube, most of these interface reviews are on, or they'll say, what's the best interface to buy, or what's the best interface for 2023 or 2024 or 2022 or 22, whatever, or the best 5 interfaces to buy, or the top 10 interfaces or whatever. You'll see videos like that streaming on YouTube, all over YouTube. And they'll usually break out, most of the time, they're 2-channel interfaces, a single channel interface, maybe 4-channel interface. Most of them seem to be a 2-channel, 2 input, 2 output. Really, really limited in channel count type interfaces. You won't see too many of the high-end interface videos on YouTube unless you specifically type and search for an interface of that magnitude. And I'm talking about interfaces like the Antelope Orion, or Antelope Orion 32 HD, or the Lynx Aurora, or the Lynx Prism, or the Apogee Symphony, or the Burl, or the RME. There are some videos out there, and there are some videos that are out there that are going to be biased, because there are going to be some people out there that are going to say RME are the best audio interfaces ever. Some people will say, well, no, there are videos with Tascam. Then there are going to be videos out there where they're going to say Apogee Symphony is the #1 industry standard for top studios around the world. But then if you go to a lot of studios out there, you'll see them. Some of them have Avid HD, the 192 HD systems. Then there are some studios with the Apollo, Universal Audio's Apollo. There's quite a few studios with the Universal Apollo. Then there's quite a few studios that have Lynx Auroras in them. Or then there's some studios that have Antelopes in them. Then the list goes on and on and on. That's why I made the video the other day about just pick something. Because now the differences between a lot of these interfaces is really there's only a few differences. One, how many inputs and outputs do you need? Some interfaces require you to buy multiple ones and sync them together through a clocking system. They have to sync so they all sync. Some of them will sync through a coaxial cable. Some will sync through the ADAT wire itself. That's called an ADAT light pipe. Some will sync through by USB or Thunderbolt or the connectivity. It just depends on the interface itself. Now, so what's separating expensive interfaces from a $200 or $5,000 unit or $10,000 unit, whatever the case? There's a few things that are separating an expensive one from a lower price one. One of the main factors is the AD-DA converter chips. We'll talk about that for a shorter period of time. Now, it's not that the best way I can describe the AD to DA converter chip in a way is to take, if I was going to use, this camera has multiple sets of cameras in it, different types of lenses. They're real in the back, on here, for different camera points of view when you're taking your camera, including the front one on the front. They're usually small as far as the lenses, but they give you different lens options to change the way you're going to take a picture, including video. And a lot of these you can take up to 4K video, which is, we're talking about the pixels and all that. Excuse me. That's so gross. I was eating earlier. So, That's so gross. Um, so yeah, I got a little cup. I need to. Oh, one of my teeth felt funny. I was picking my teeth like so. Everyone knows when something gets caught in your teeth, and it just anyhow. So even though here's the thing to an untrained photographer or someone who's not a photographer at all. What separates taking pictures with this, and now most of the time people will say when I take pictures with my iPhone or my Android, the pictures look great. The colors look great. The pictures look great of whatever I'm taking a picture of. And this is true. Most of the time when you take when you start to break down is in the video. But a lot of times you'll take pictures and they'll look great. Now, the issue, and it will always be the issue to someone who doesn't know photography, one of the crucial and important factors to what makes pictures look really, really good is the lens and the sensor size. The bigger the sensor and its ability to capture lighting in the image, the better the quality the image will be. This is known throughout the photography world, period. This is why in some instances they still use big, gigantic, bulky cameras that you don't want to carry. This is why they still use the type of cameras they're using in Hollywood. This is why they use a certain kind of cameras for television, TV newsrooms. Even when you're on a go, this is why they don't use iPhones and cell phones to report stories with. They always use high-end pro-level cameras. Now, not to say that someone can't take a video. It's not like they can't use the video footage from like a body cam of a police officer, or they can't use the footage from a dash cam, or they can't use the footage from they will use the footage to show the video, but to a point. Now, the biggest and the most important factor to why is that the case then, if the cell phone sensor in your phone is no bigger than the size of your nail of your pinky. You're trying to capture a ton of detail on a sensor that small. So it can only capture, even though it may say, whatever the pixels or whatever. And once you got to understand that when you're looking at pictures, what separates a high-end camera is not only just the picture itself, but it's using the depth, the shallow depth of field, the dynamic range, the shadowing, the vignetting, the color aberration, all these factors to color bleeding, to getting the images being crystal clear, even in dark shadows, the lighting conditions. There's a ton of factors that makes why a pro-level camera will always take a better picture. But the two most important things out of the pro-level camera, and I happen to have one of mine, is one factor is the lens, the glass, the lens, the glass, and the size of the sensor inside of this camera. The size of the sensor in this camera is way bigger than the size of the sensor that would be in your phone. It can capture a way more ton of detail, and because of that, because you're bringing in a lot more light, a lot more detail, and a lot more light can come through the camera lens, a lot more detail. The glass itself, and this is a 70-200 lens, and it's really to capture a ton more detail. This is why if I ever take a photo if I ever take a picture of a subject, let's say you're standing 15 feet from me, I'm going to still be able to zoom in and get a ton of detail versus if I try to take a picture of someone standing 15 feet from me with this phone. You're going to be able to take their picture, but when you zoom in, the details are not going to be there. It's going to start to break the image is going to start to break down. So my point is, so I'm trying to use these to explain the difference. People that people that are into professional photography knows this. So why am I using the camera and the phone to explain AD to DA conversion? It's like this. People think that digital, you hear the argument all the time with analog versus digital. You have to understand, when you're listening to digital, you're not listening to real anything. You're listening to samples. You're not listening to an actual real signal. This is why when they say analog to digital, it has to be converted from analog, which is the signal that you're hearing. I don't care if you're getting a signal from a keyboard, which is also a library of sampled sounds. But the reason why the sounds in a keyboard is they have AD to DA converters inside synthesizers, like that my Core Triton or my Roland XP80 or any synthesizer, Core Cronus or whatever board you have like that. Or even if you're listening to VST instruments on your computer, software, those are samples. So the DA, so the better the AD to DA converter chip processing in these synthesizers, the better it sounds. Because it's kind of like this. The best way to describe it is, either you're going to get this or you're just not. It's not being mean about it. You're gonna understand the concept or you're not. Because there are lots of people that think digital is real. Just like they think plugins are real things. Like they actually think plugins are real pieces of gear. To a extent, I mean, they know it's software. Like they say, okay, I got a UAD plugin of an LA2A. Not realizing you're just listening to a sample model version of an LA2A. But what's really giving a real LA2A compressor the sound is the electronics of a real piece of gear versus a sample, basically a photograph copy of it. So the best way to describe that is the reason why I was using the camera is even though I would say, I'll go back to this. I'll use the Behringer, this FCA 1616. And it has an AD to DA converter. There's no internal DSP software inside of here to help shape the analog signal to convert it into digital. I think I got to sneeze. Hey, whoo, excuse me. It's just straight. Whatever's coming through these are very basic Midas preamps. Or line input signals that's coming into here, and then it's going to go straight to an AD analog to digital converter to convert it into ones and zeros. the more ones and zeros of information that's being sent out of here through your USB or your Thunderbolt or your Firewire or whatever into your computer, it's the same as if you took a picture from your cell phone and sent it to your computer, watched it on the screen, blow it up, zoom in as much as possible, and you'll see that when you take a picture with your cell phone and you zoom in to look at as much detail, you'll see how much the picture really starts to break apart in image quality. Compared to, let's say, I'm going to pretend, even though this is my Motu, this is my Motu 24AO. It's an old 80. We're going to pretend, let's say this had internal DSP processing as well as better quality. Let's say it had better quality microphone preamps. And on top of that, it had more advanced AD converter chips to send it to your computer. Are way more advanced that can actually capture a lot more detail. So it's the same concept as if I take a picture with this camera, send it into my computer, zoom in, you'll see how much the photo stays in way more detail because the sensor in here is bigger. It captures a lot more light, a lot more detail to the picture. And this is why photographers still use cameras of this magnitude, because the lens and the sensor's bigger. It can capture a lot more detail. So your AD to converter and more expensive interfaces are capturing a lot more detail to sampling the sound. And this is why it's important when you set the bit rate in your DAW, because your CPU in your DAW has to process all that data. This is like when you set your camera on RAW, it's capturing so much data. Your CPU's processing RAM has to keep up. This is the reason why, for example, on a PC, most PCs that have 8 to 16 gigs of RAM, unless you got this massive gaming PC, versus your average value. My Mac computer right here has 32 gigs of RAM and is a 4-core processor. It is has way more processing power for doing video and audio. This is why Macs are more preferred for doing audio work or studio audio work than PCs, even though you don't really need to have, it just really depends. You can do, I've been using DAWs in PCs for years without any problems because I'm not doing a ton of plug-in processing because I use more outboard gear and an analog console than I do a ton of plugins. But that's a different video. So the details from my camera here, my Canon, is going to present a lot more detail to the picture. So that's the reason why. This is why when you see stuff in your pref, when you setting up your DAW, this is why you see 44.1 versus 48 versus 96K versus 192 and so forth in the sampling rate. 192K sampling is going to capture a ton more of detail to the audio than it would if you were at 44. Even though 44.1, which is a 16-bit 44.1 standard sampling rate, is a standard for CD quality. But in when you're trying to listen to a whole ton of detail, especially in movies and so forth, this is why they get into the 96K. Usually the The issue is not so much when it comes to the interface sampling that much amount of audio details at 96K as it is your computer, because now we're getting into, not only we're getting into the CPU processing the data, it's loading up the RAM, and it's loading it and it's moving at a buffer speed. This is why you look at some computers with DDR2 or DDR3, and it's running maybe a 1028 megahertz of buffer speed or whatever, or 2056 of buffer speed. That's how fast the data can travel into the RAM, into the random access memory. How fast can it do that to get to the CPU to be processed, and can the CPU even keep up with that much amount of data? And a lot of times it can't, and some algorithms of the CPU, it won't be able to keep up, and that's when stuff starts to lock up because of how the CPU processes data. Your CPU also still trying to process the video. It's still trying to process the DAWs programming. It's still trying to process the sound card, because your sound card in your computer, Mac or PC, are AD to DA converters. But you'll notice that on your sound card, it usually have one input and one output, a microphone input and and usually an output, or maybe 2 or 3 outputs for running multiple computer monitor speakers. But it won't be something like an A. That's why it's always highly recommended to run an audio interface designed to handle the inputs and outputs of audio. But the chip processing in for example, this is a 24 input and output. It has converter chips to handle the audio. So your slowest point in this, when you're running 24 inputs and 24 outputs, is not the AD to the DA converters in here. It's how fast the data can get out of your PC as well, or your Mac. But so a lot of that has to be taken into consideration when you start looking, especially if you're looking to move up from a $200 interface to, now we're talking to the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $10,000 interfaces or whatever. It's a lot of it's about the AD and DA converter and the internal DSP processing capability. The more details that it can process to go into your computer, the more you're going to hear that when it's converted back from ones and zeros, it has to be converted back from digital, from ones and zeros, because we can't understand digital. Only the computer knows what digital, which is nothing but ones and zeros. There's nothing. That's what it sounds. That's what it. I don't know what's the word for it. I don't know if it's not condescending or facetious. I don't know. There's a word for it, but I'm trying to use an example that if you heard ones and zeros, it's not going to sound like me talking. Now, your ability to hear me talking to the videos, because your computer is converting the audio that's recording through the microphone of my camera into this video, is converting it from analog, which is me talking, because me as a human, I'm speaking analog, and it converts it to digital. So it goes in the computer. It's going from me saying like this to ones and zeros, and then it knows you can't understand. The people that design computers knows that a human can't understand, so they have to convert it back. So that's why we get the digital, the audio converter, AD, the DA. It converts back from back to you hear me through your speakers coming through your sound card, because your sound card is also an AD to DA converter. It's the same thing with your CD player. Your CD player has an AD to DA converter. If you have a synthesizer like a Roland Phantom or a Korg Kronos or Yamaha Montage, when you plug speakers, outputs coming out of those synthesizers, you're hearing the AD to DA converter coming out of the synthesizer. of those samples, because those samples have been converted to ones and zeros for the chip process. It does the exact same thing internally in your synthesizer, the same way it would be doing inside your computer. And you're hearing banks of nothing but samples of different sounds sample. This is why when they do videos talking about certain keyboards, like we sampled 2 megabytes of a Yamaha C9 grand 9-foot grand pianos. It's 200 or 2 gigs of sampling. It took up that much. They did 192K sampling to get as much, to make that piano sound as much realistic like the real one when you play the piano patch on your keyboard. You're hearing a sample at the highest sampling rate. This is why you see sampling rate. And a lot of times, this is why they tell you to turn your sampling rate down when you're recording, then turn it back up when it's time to listen to the audio. Turn it back up. Ideally, you'll turn it down to 256 or maybe 128 to record, because your buffer speed of your processor and your RAM has to be to keep up with all the data coming in. Once it's got it on there, it can send the data out way faster and convert it back out faster than it can record, especially if you're multi-tracking. So this is the key function. So this is when you're looking at high-end converters, their ability to process and sampling. That's why some of these lower price and audio interfaces cannot process as much. That's why in other words, you can get a 2-channel, it may be 24-bit 96K, but it only has 2 channels, because that's as much as the processing for those AD to DA converter chips inside that interface it can handle. High-end something like maybe a Lynx Aurora or a Antelope Orion or a Apogee Symphony, or we're talking converters of that magnitude, can handle the multi-processing and the analog to digital converting, and then going into the DAW, and once the DAW sends it back out, it can send a signal out. It can handle the digital to analog conversion without you having any latency issues. Latency is that delay hearing effect. So that's going to sum up on analog to AD to DA converters. It's like a snapshot. The more details of the signal, the more realistic it's going to sound in that instance. So that's the best way to describe, because a lot of people think that analog to digital, they're thinking that digital is also audio, and digital is not audio. Digital is binary system for computers. You're hearing, when you're listening to digital, you're listening to samples of analog. It's like that's why it's like the best. It's kind of like if I sample something in my MPC of something, I'm listening to a sample of it. It's like if I record a trumpet and I record it at 44.1, and then I take that same trumpet and I record it at 48, and then I take the same trumpet and record it at 96. 96 is going to sound a lot more realistic like a trumpet than 44.1. 44.1 will sound like a trumpet, but 96 will sound like a real trumpet. So that's the best way to describe that. A lot of times it's about the capability to process the sample and not have any issues. This is the reason why expensive interfaces cost what they cost. And there's also other circuitry in there on the analog circuits to help it stay as realistic as possible. Whether you're getting sample sounds out of your synthesizer, or you're using a preamp and an acoustic guitar, or you're micing some set of drums, or whatever the case may be. All these are factors into how the quality of the audio is going to sound and how realistic it's going to sound, and not only that, how well it can keep up when you're trying to process multiple sounds at the exact same time. So if you got 50 tracks in your Pro Tools section, or your Reaper session, or your FL Studio session, or whatever DAW you're using, and you want to hear all those sounds without the computer locking up, the biggest question is, this is why I've stated, your computer is important because of the processing. Because most people aren't working off a tape machine, or working off excuse me, that is so gross. That's so gross. That's annoying. That's why I'm simply like, why don't you just edit your videos? I probably need to start doing that. So your computer has to be able to handle all of that audio, whether you recorded a acoustic guitar or you're using a VST instrument. It's got to process the plugins that you're using, because plugins are basically internal, versus there's processing that come with a lot of these. That's another reason why some of these interfaces that cost more, because they come with their own software that has DSP processing as well. Basically, they have their own set of plugins, like UAD, Apollo has a lot of its own internal DSP processing. Motu's have them. The Antelope Orion has it. A lot of them do. Lynx has it. Apogee has it. That's why they have their own software with their own mixers and their own processing as well internally that help shape the sound. All that processing, and a lot of times it helps not take some of the load off the CPU and RAM in your PC or Mac. So that's the whole spiel of when you're considering audio interfaces. How much processing do you need in a nutshell? And the small ones don't take a lot of processing like the big ones. And it's all based on how many channels of audio do you need, input and outputs, based on how you're going to mix. Sometimes you need a lot of inputs, but you're going to mix in the box, so you only need 2 outputs. Sometimes if you're like me, because I like mixing across a console, because I'm going to implement outboard gear through my patch bay and into the console, I need at least 24 outputs, because I'm running at least 24 channels, and that's a different video as well. So that's going to do it on this video to help you understand choosing an audio interface for your studio. Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great one, and we'll see you in the next one.